Hi guys, here for a kind of spur of the moment discussion video about two elements that are part of the foundation of how I read. I've sensed both of these things about myself before and mentioned them at different points while I've had the channel, but certain events, books, discussions of the past week have made me articulate them to myself more clearly than I had before. We talk a lot on BookTube about how great it is that we all have different opinions and reactions to books, how boring it would be if we all found the same things to value. The tagline of my channel is disagreement is fun, okay? And A, all of that is true, but B, those are popular things to say because who would ever be the one to say otherwise? Like, even if you thought that you just kind of wish that everybody agreed with you, like, no one would say it. But all of those phrases can feel like platitudes when you are in the middle of a book discussion and finding it truly difficult to understand where the other person is coming from. And when you've been following someone for a while, you have a larger sample size of things to confuse you. So not only will someone have praised to the skies a book that you could take or leave, but then they'll turn around and criticize a book that you find brilliant. Because sometimes I've actually found myself thinking, this is where you take your stand and nitpick? You just overlooked everything that was stale and janky about that other book. And I'm sure that people have had the same reaction to my taste and the things that I choose to highlight. Fundamentally, we all make hypocrites of ourselves through taste. Like, we just have to accept that. But the thing is that sometimes it feels like I'm diverging with people at such an early point in how we're approaching a book that we end up talking past each other immediately, even when we're really trying to listen. So I've identified two personal, early points of divergence. And the first is something I'm going to call, I don't know what to call it. I've been trying to think of phrases. Storytelling finesse is what I'll say for right now. And in the next video, I'll be talking about the idea of likable and unlikable characters. This past week, I read Amy and Isabelle by Elizabeth Strout. She's most famous for her Pulitzer Prize-winning novel Olive Kitteridge, but this was her debut. It's ridiculous to me that this was a debut. It was published in 1998. And this is why you should read your TBR, people, because I've owned this for over a year. And turns out it was much better than almost anything I've read in that time. And I say that because Strout has it. She has a spark, she has a flair that has nothing to do with showing off. Everything notches and clicks so satisfyingly. The ceiling of both her capabilities and her execution is so much higher than it is even for most other gifted writers. This feeling that I'm talking about, this sense that, oh, the author has it, is something that I get within the first few pages of a book, and it's rare. I was trying to think back right before I filmed this on the 2.5 years that I've had this channel. Scary. And throughout that time, contemporary books I've read that have fallen into this category are The Gustav Sonata by Rose Tremaine, Gilead by Marlon Robinson, Lincoln to the Bardo by George Saunders. I'm rather evangelical about that one. The Green Road by Anne Enright, much stronger in some parts than others in that case, but it was always there. Possibly Margaret the First by Danielle Dutton, The Cost of Living by Deborah Levy, which I mentioned in my recent favorite books of 2018 video, and now Amy and Isabelle. Do Not Say We Have Nothing by Madeline Tien, and The Trick to Time by Kit DeWall. Sections of that last one are on the edge of this category that I'm talking about. And there are probably some others that I couldn't think of off the top of my head at the time, but those are some that stand out. What I'm trying to describe isn't just the excitement of starting a book and being hit with, oh my God, I can already tell I'm gonna love this and it's just gonna be a fantastic experience. Because I feel that way about books that I wouldn't necessarily categorize with the ones that I mentioned before. So it goes beyond love or appreciation for what an author is creating. And it's also not the same thing as beautiful writing, which is one of the most common and confusing phrases on BookTube, but beautiful has always struck me as such a powerful but vague adjective. And actually something special is that for the booktubers I've been following for a few years, I now understand what they mean when they use it. For me, beautiful writing can be a variety of things. When I use it, it can mean that it's lyrical, or that it's spare and polished, or generous and expansive, or just seductive somehow, or that the writing has a lovely rhythm to it. It would be more useful, I guess, if beautiful just meant lyrical, but I happen to find a lot of lyrical writing kind of wordy and self-indulgent, unfortunately. But again, that's related, but not quite what I'm talking about. The quality that sets apart the books I named is an absolute command of language that I find so thrilling and freeing. I can't describe how much I relax when I encounter this quality, this undiluted storytelling. And that's why I value it so highly, for its rarity and for the way it releases me from a certain wariness that I almost always feel while I'm reading. Now, I'm guessing it's clear from how imprecisely I'm talking that this isn't a standard I consider objective or infallible in terms of anyone else's experience. It just, for me, this sense is so quick and concrete that when people nitpick these types of books, my first thought is, but the writing, like the writing is at such a ridiculously high level. Who cares about X or Y imperfection in the characters or the plot or a lack of representation? I mean, these are all great things to discuss, but the writing, who cares? And the answer I've come to understand is other people. Other people care a lot more than I do, and care a lot less when an author doesn't have this level of skill and suppleness. And the other day it sort of hit me that I've begun thinking about it all as a road trip where the author is the driver and the rest of us pile in as passengers, and maybe we're going past amazing scenery, right? And at the end of the drive, we all get out, and other people are like, "Oh my God, those lakes and fields and cliffs, they were gorgeous." And here's the point where I'd be like, "Yeah, the driver didn't really use their turn signal though, and they were speeding up to red lights and then stopping abruptly, and didn't it bother anyone else that we were kind of drifting in and out of our lane?" The rest of the passengers could very reasonably be like, "Get over yourself. Just enjoy the glittering lake." But the consistent anxiety from the questionable driving in this questionable metaphor would affect me more than the average person. And this is also how certain conversations feel when someone adores a book that I think is written appallingly. They'll be like, "We just drove over the rim of the Grand Canyon, not over the rim, then you'd be dead. Around the rim of the Grand Canyon at sunrise. That was magnificent." And I'll be like, "But they drove like a maniac. How could you even enjoy yourself?" I realize bringing all of this up that A, we don't all assess good writing in the same way. In fact, almost no two people do. And B, legitimate questions will arise about the distinctions I'm making. Aren't a well-executed plot and deliberate pacing and rich, developed characters also examples of skillful writing? Where is the separation I'm tending to make between those elements and command of language? This radiator is like making a ruckus. I'm sorry. The answer to the first question I would say is yes. And to the second, I don't know. Often all those things are intertwined. Great writing breeds other great elements of writing, usually. So I'm not making this video because I completely understand everything I want to convey, but what I'm trying to isolate is that the books I mentioned earlier have given me a very specific kind of pleasure that's related to the finesse of the author's voice, above and beyond any of their other noteworthy qualities. And when I find a book like Amy and Isabelle that's so special in this respect, I'm going to approach it very differently from a lot of other readers. Did I actually say anything? The question you dread thinking at the end of a video. Please tell me, does any of what I just said, sound recognizable to you? Do you also have these instincts about extraordinary writing quality and ability very early on in books? Do you also have an incredibly noxious radiator right next to the only place you can film? Or do you consider yourself more of a scenery reader? Is there a middle ground where sometimes you're one and sometimes you're the other? I mean, the one thing I can say about taste, like I mentioned earlier, is that it's not consistent for any of us, which is mostly frustrating, but can be wonderful. So anyway, tell me the things, and I will see you soonish for a video of this nature on likable and unlikable characters.